"You are a burden. You should have stayed at the hospital so you would not ruin my week." The scream bounced against the cold tiles of the hallway and pierced right into the center of my chest, exactly where the scar from the surgery still burned with every breath. I am Eleanor. I am 71 years old, and as a retired archivist, I spent more than 4 decades cataloging the lives and documents of others in absolute silence. Jessica did not know that someone who spends a lifetime classifying old papers and other people's memories also learns exactly which words to keep, what evidence to record, and what to leave on the table for the moment when the entire family structure collapses. The heart attack did not announce itself with romantic pains or elegant movie-like fainting spells. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was preparing vegetable soup in the kitchen of my small apartment. It was as if a block of reinforced concrete, the kind used to build bridges, fell directly onto my sternum. The air vanished from the room. I remember dropping the wooden spoon, hearing the dull thud against the kitchen tiles, and then feeling the crushing weight that forced me to my knees. I did not feel fear in that first moment, but rather a strange, cold, methodical clarity. My brain, accustomed to processing files by order of urgency, dictated the steps to me with astonishing coldness. Crawl to the wall phone, pick up the receiver, dial 911, and give my exact address before the darkness swallowed me completely. I woke up 2 days later in a bed in the coronary care unit. The ceiling was covered with white panels and fluorescent lights that buzzed with a constant, almost imperceptible tone, mixed with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. I had tubes in my arms and a feeling of absolute fragility in my body, as if my bones had been replaced by fine glass. The attending doctor, a young man named Dr. Davis. He explained to me with a slow voice that one of my main arteries had been completely blocked. They had to insert a catheter and place a metal stent to keep the pathway open. While he talked about blood flow and blood pressure, my archivist mind translated the information. A vital conduit had been clogged with the rubble of the years, and now my life depended on a small metal spring. During the 5 days I spent in the hospital, I had a lot of time to observe and remember. The white ceiling became a screen where I projected the files of my own existence. I thought of Richard, my ex-husband. We divorced over 35 years ago. Richard was not a cruel man. He was simply an absent man, the kind who fades away when responsibility weighs more than novelty. One day, he packed his suits, his golf clubs, and his excuses and closed the door. There were no screams or broken plates, just the heavy silence of a house that suddenly felt too big for a single woman and a 6-year-old girl. From that day on, my life became a mental spreadsheet before computers even existed. I got a job at the city archive. I spent 8 hours a day in a windowless basement, surrounded by the smell of dust, dried ink, and yellowing paper. I classified death certificates, property records, and building permits from the 1920s. It was an invisible job, a silent service that no one thanked me for, but it kept the city in order. And every penny I earned, every overtime hour I worked, classifying backlogged files went into a savings account for Jessica. Jessica was a brilliant, demanding, and perpetually dissatisfied girl. I made sure she lacked nothing. I paid for her private school by sewing hems at night and depriving myself of new clothes for 15 years. I paid for her college tuition with the sweat of my brow and the curvature of my spine. I saw her graduate. I saw her become an aggressive executive. I saw her climb the ranks in the corporate world with a determination that made me proud and scared me in equal parts. Jessica learned how to command, how to demand, how to optimize time. But at some point during that meteoric rise, she forgot how to look people in the eyes without calculating their usefulness. The day I was discharged from the hospital, it was raining. It was a fine, persistent rain that fogged up the huge windows of the waiting room. I was sitting in a wheelchair, as dictated by the hospital protocol, holding a small cloth bag with my belongings. The nurse on duty, a kind woman named Emily, had helped me get dressed. My movements were slow, clumsy. My chest hurt when I took a deep breath, a constant stab that reminded me of the precariousness of my situation. Jessica arrived 45 minutes late. She walked through the revolving door in her impeccable designer coat, shaking the water off her umbrella with sharp, impatient gestures. She did not run toward me. She did not ask me how I felt. Her first action was to look at her smartwatch and sigh. "Mom, please tell me you already signed all the discharge papers. I have the car double parked and the traffic is hell," she said by way of greeting. There was no hug, no kiss on the forehead, just the logistical urgency of someone who has to move a package from one place to another. "Everything is ready, Jessica," I answered in a low voice, measuring my words. The ride in her huge black SUV was an exercise in containment. The cold leather seats chilled my back, and the air conditioning was set to a glacial temperature. Outside, the gray city passed quickly through the tinted windows. Jessica drove with one hand on the steering wheel, while through the vehicle's speaker system, she juggled 3 different calls with her office. She talked about profit margins, market strategies, and incompetent staff. At one point during the second call, she told her assistant, "Cancel the 3 o'clock meeting. I have to install my mother in the house, and it is going to take me all afternoon." Install. That was the exact word she used, as if I were a software update or a bulky appliance that required a designated space in her living room. My archivist mind cataloged the word immediately. Label. Dehumanization. Date. Today. We arrived at her house in the exclusive suburbs. It was a construction of straight lines, huge windows, and clinical white walls. Everything in Jessica's house seemed designed not to be touched. We walked in silently. Her husband, Mark, was sitting at the kitchen island in front of a laptop. He barely looked up from his financial charts. "Hello, Eleanor. Good to see you are out," he muttered, without looking me in the eyes before going back to typing furiously. My 14-year-old grandson, Andrew, walked down the hallway with huge black headphones over his ears, staring at his phone screen. He did not even notice I had walked in. Jessica took me to the bedroom on the ground floor. It was a room that originally functioned as a study, but now it was filled with stacked boxes on one side and a stationary bike on the other. They had placed a twin bed in the center, squeezed against the wall. "It is better that you stay downstairs so you do not have to climb stairs," Jessica said, dropping my cloth bag on the bed. "You have the guest bathroom at the end of the hallway. I am having a terrible week, Mom. I am closing the quarter at the company, and I do not have time to be chasing after you. Mark bought groceries at the supermarket. There is food in the fridge. I only ask that you do not make a mess in the kitchen." "Do not worry about me, Jessica. I know how to take care of myself," I replied, slowly sitting on the edge of the mattress. The bed was too low. I knew right away that getting up in the mornings was going to be torture for my aching chest. "I hope so," she sighed, turning around. "The cardiologist sent me your list of medications. It is a pain. You have to take the blood pressure pill at 8, the blood thinner at noon, and the cholesterol one at night. Please do not get confused. I do not have time to take you to the emergency room again because of a careless mistake." She walked out of the room and closed the door. I was left alone with the sound of the rain hitting the window and the distant hum of the state-of-the-art refrigerator. I opened my small bag. With calculated and slow movements, I took out my few clothes and methodically folded them on the only available chair. Then I took out my medications, 3 different bottles. Like a good archivist, I took out my yellow notebook and wrote down the exact times with a black pen. Precision is the only thing that saves us from chaos. I also wrote down my pulse, 68 beats per minute. Slow, tired. The following 4 days were an exercise in invisibility. I woke up before dawn, moving through the house like a ghost so as not to wake anyone. I prepared my own tea in silence, washed the cup immediately and dried it so there would be no trace of my presence. I avoided crossing paths with Jessica in the hallway. Her stress was palpable. It filled the air of the house like a toxic gas. She walked fast, talking to herself, yelling at the phone, complaining about her employees. Mark was a total zero, a man who seemed to live in a different dimensional plane, concerned only with the stock market fluctuations. I spent the hours sitting in the chair in my room, reading an old book or simply looking out the window. I observed the dynamics of that family and took mental notes. The coldness, the lack of physical contact, the total absence of conversations that were not related to money or schedules. I, who had sacrificed my youth so Jessica would not suffer any shortages, realized now that I had given her the tools to survive in the world, but not to inhabit it with humanity. My sacrifice had created an efficient, polished machine, but completely empty inside. On Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after my heart attack, my body betrayed me. I woke up with severe dizziness. The room was spinning, and I felt a sharp ringing in my ears. My blood pressure had dropped suddenly, a common side effect of the new medications, as the doctor at the hospital had warned me. I sat on the edge of the bed, waiting for the world to stop spinning. I needed water to take my morning pill. I took a deep breath. I put on my slippers and dragged my feet toward the kitchen. The house was silent, which meant that Mark and Andrew had already left, and Jessica was surely in her upstairs office, preparing for her famous quarter-end presentation. I made it to the kitchen, holding onto the walls. I went to the cupboard to get a glass. My fingers, trembling and weak, failed to hold the weight. The glass slipped and fell onto the porcelain floor. The crash of the glass breaking into 1,000 pieces was deafening. I stood paralyzed, looking at the shiny fragments scattered across the immaculate floor. My heart gave a painful lurch. Instinctively, I tried to step back, but I got even dizzier. In my clumsy attempt to keep my balance, my elbow bumped the plastic organizer where I kept my weekly pills. The small case fell to the floor, bursting open. The white, pink, and yellow pills rolled everywhere, mixing with the broken glass. A disaster. Absolute chaos in my daughter's temple of perfection. I heard loud, hurried footsteps coming down the stairs. Jessica's heels struck the wood furiously. She entered the kitchen like a hurricane dressed in an impeccable tailored suit. She was clutching her phone in one hand and some documents in the other. She stopped dead when she saw the scene. She looked at the glass. She looked at the scattered pills. Then she looked at me, hunched over, holding onto the edge of the quartz countertop, breathing heavily. I waited for her to ask if I was okay. I waited for her to look at my pale face, my shortness of breath. I waited deep in my heart for a tiny glimpse of the little girl whose scraped knees I used to clean with iodine. But Jessica's eyes showed no concern. They showed disgust. They showed the deep exasperation of someone whose perfect schedule is interrupted by an untimely obstacle. "Mom, for the love of God," she exclaimed, throwing her arms up. "Look what you did. I told you not to make a mess." "I got dizzy, Jessica," I muttered, my voice cracking, feeling like I could not get enough air. "I just wanted to get some water for my pill. My hands failed me." "I do not have time for this," she yelled, her voice rising in volume until it became a sharp shriek that hurt my ears. "I have the most important meeting of the year in an hour, and now I have to clean up this damn disaster because you cannot even hold a damn glass." "I will pick it up. Get me the broom," I tried to say, bending down slowly, even though my chest burned as if I had hot coals inside. "Do not touch anything. You are going to cut yourself and make me waste more time taking you to the doctor." She took a step forward, her face red with anger, the veins in her neck bulging under the silk of her blouse. "You are a burden. You should have stayed at the hospital so you would not ruin my week. You do nothing but get in the way since you got here. I am sick of your slowness, your medicines, and your ailments. I wish they had kept you admitted for a whole month." The echo of her words bounced off the kitchen walls. Time seemed to stop. I did not cry. Not a single tear escaped me. Crying is for when you feel pain over an unforeseen loss. What I felt in that moment was a clinical revelation. It was like opening an old file and finding the irrefutable proof of a crime. The archivist inside me took the document of my daughter's words, stamped it with red ink, and put it away in the closed cases folder. I looked her in the eyes. My silence was absolute. I did not try to defend myself. I did not remind her of the sleepless nights sewing to pay for her school. I did not remind her of the hot plates of food I served her while I settled for the leftovers. I did not remind her that the heart that was failing me now had worn out from pushing her life forward. The facts, when they are overwhelming, do not need defense attorneys. I stood up slowly. The dizziness had vanished, replaced by a perfect, icy clarity. "You are right, Jessica," I said in a voice so low and steady that it forced her into silence for a second. "You have a very important meeting. Go." She blinked, bewildered by my calmness. She expected drama. She expected tears from a fragile old woman so she could feel justified in her anger. Finding no resistance, she scoffed, turned around, and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the engine of her SUV start seconds later, followed by the slam of the garage door. I was left alone in the kitchen. I looked at the wall clock, 8:15 in the morning. Being careful not to step on the glass, I left the kitchen and walked toward the bedroom on the ground floor. My breathing was regular now. The pain in my chest was still there, but it was a manageable pain, an old, familiar pain. I opened the bedroom door. I took my small cloth bag out of the closet. With the same methodical precision with which I classified the files in the city basement, I began to fold my clothes. First the gray pants, aligning the seams, then the blouses, smoothing out the wrinkles with the palm of my hand, the paired socks. I packed my things. I did not leave a single trace of my existence in that room. I went to the bathroom. I took my toothbrush and my comb. I checked that there was not a single white hair left in the sink. I erased my footprints from my daughter's house with the efficiency of a professional. Finally, I went back to the bedroom and sat on the edge of the low bed. I opened the front pocket of my bag and took out my old digital recorder, a small black dictaphone I used at the archive to record notes on damaged files. It is an obsolete device by the modern standards of Jessica's house, but to me, it was always a precision tool. I turned it on. The red light blinked, indicating it had enough battery and memory space. I looked at the small glass table next to the bed. It was clean, cold, empty, exactly like the heart of the woman who had just walked out the door. I pressed the record button. The seconds counter started moving on the small screen. 1, 2, 3 seconds of silence before speaking. I brought the microphone close to my lips. I needed every word to be recorded with absolute clarity. There were going to be no screams. There were going to be no insults. Just the precise and detailed enumeration of a memory that Jessica had decided to erase, and that I, like a good archivist, was going to leave on the glass table for her to listen to at the exact moment the house was in absolute silence. I took a deep breath, holding the dictaphone firmly, and began to dictate the final file of our history. And when I finished, I left it exactly in the center of the table. I took my bag and closed the front door behind me without making the slightest noise. The street air hit my face with the hardness of an icy slap as soon as I crossed the threshold of the perimeter gate. I did not look back. The house with white walls and huge windows remained behind me, standing as a modern mausoleum where I had almost buried my dignity. Walking the 2.5 blocks to the main avenue was a challenge that my body, still fragile and betrayed by the recent heart attack, made me pay for with every step. My chest burned with a dull throb, a metallic reminder that my life depended on a small spring in an artery. However, my mind was clearer than ever. I counted my steps, 140, 210, 300. The methodical precision chased the fear away and kept the dizziness at bay. I reached the corner just as a red traffic light stopped the morning commute. I raised my hand with what little strength I had left. A yellow taxi dented on the passenger door and with a blinking illuminated sign stopped in front of me. The driver, a man in his 60s with weathered hands and a worn-out wool cap, got out of the vehicle upon noticing the slowness with which I tried to open the back door. "Let me help you, ma'am," he said, taking my small cloth bag with a gentleness that contrasted with his rough appearance. "Take your time. There is no rush." I settled into the back seat, feeling the rough fabric upholstery under my hands. It was a humble environment, smelling of artificial pine and old tobacco, but infinitely warmer than the glacial leather of my daughter's vehicle. I gave him the address of my apartment, that small refuge in the center of the city that Jessica had been insisting on emptying and putting up for sale for months, arguing that an old woman living alone did not need the space and that the money could be invested in a high-yield fund. I never signed the authorization. My archivist instinct always dictated that one must never destroy the original document, no matter how many digitized copies are offered. The ride took 40 minutes. Through the window, I watched how the exclusive suburbs, with their perfectly manicured lawns and electrified fences, gave way to the real city. Exposed brick buildings appeared, sidewalks cracked by the roots of old trees, newsstands, and the messy hustle and bustle of people working to survive, not to accumulate. The driver, whose ID badge on the dashboard introduced him as Joe, looked at me a couple of times through the rearview mirror. "Are you feeling okay? You look a bit pale," he asked cautiously, without invading my space. "I am exactly where I need to be, Joe." "Thank you very much," I replied in an even voice. When we arrived at my building, a 5-story block built in the 70s, I paid him with exact change and left him a tip that made him raise his eyebrows in gratitude. Joe insisted on carrying my cloth bag to the elevator door. I thanked him with a silent nod. The courtesy of a stranger felt overwhelming after a week of being treated as a logistical burden by my own blood. The elevator creaked on its way up to the 3rd floor. When I inserted the key into the lock of my door, the metal made a familiar, resounding click. I pushed the wood open, and the smell of confinement, fine dust, and dried lavender welcomed me. The sunlight filtered through the half-closed blinds, drawing lines of golden dust in the air. I closed the door behind me, threw the deadbolt, and for the first time since I fell to my knees in the kitchen with a tight chest, I took a deep breath without feeling that I was taking up air that did not belong to me. I walked to my reading armchair, a mustard-colored upholstered piece that knew the exact shape of my back. I sat down slowly, took my yellow notebook out of my bag, black pen, date, time, 10:15 in the morning, pulse 72 beats per minute, blood pressure stable, judging by the absence of ringing in my ears. In front of me stood the most important piece of furniture in my apartment, a 4-drawer metal filing cabinet, painted industrial gray that I rescued from the city basement when they upgraded the furniture a decade ago. In that filing cabinet, there were no death certificates of strangers or building permits. My entire life and Jessica's were cataloged in there. I stood up carefully and walked toward the cabinet. I opened the 2nd drawer, the one corresponding to the 1990s. The sound of the metal rails sliding was music to my ears. My fingers, used to reading paper as if it were braille, moved across the hanging folders until they stopped at a dark blue one. The label, written in my straight handwriting, simply said, "Education." I pulled out the folder and took it to the small dining table. When I opened it, the smell of old ink and carbon paper receipts hit my memory. There lay the moral evidence of my existence. There were no wills, deeds, or powers of attorney. Just the relentless accounting of a mother's love. My eyes rested on a yellowing receipt, dated October of 1999. The handwritten amount represented the equivalent of 4 months of my full salary at the city archive. It was the payment for the exchange trip to Canada that Jessica demanded so much in her senior year of high school. The memory projected in my mind with the sharpness of a newly classified file. I was 46 years old. I had been working double shifts in the archive basement for 2 weeks, breathing in humidity and mold spores, classifying boxes of tax records from 1940 that were about to rot. My hands were cracked from the dust, and the lack of sunlight had left me with perpetual dark circles. But the extra money was not enough. Almost half of the trip's fee was still missing. One rainy afternoon, just like so many others, I opened my small wooden jewelry box. I took out the solid gold chain with the carved crucifix that my mother had left me when she died. It was the only valuable thing I owned in the world, my only anchor to the past. I walked to the pawn shop downtown. The appraiser, a man with a bored look, weighed it on a tiny scale and handed me a wad of worn-out bills. That same night, I arrived home soaked. Jessica was sitting in this same mustard armchair watching television, annoyed because dinner was not ready. I took out the envelope with the money and the payment receipt for the trip and put it on the table for her. Jessica took the envelope, counted the bills quickly, and looked at the receipt. She did not get up to hug me. She did not ask me why I was soaked or why my hands were shivering from cold and exhaustion. Her exact words, recorded in my memory with lethal precision, were, "It is about time, Mom. My friends bought their tickets weeks ago. I was going to be the only loser left in town. I will go pay tomorrow, but I need you to give me money for a new winter coat. It gets really cold up there, and I am not taking the garbage they sell here at the market." That day, the archivist living in my head took note. She recorded the absence of gratitude, the normalization of someone else's sacrifice, and the perpetual entitlement. But the mother who inhabited my heart justified the act. She is young, I told myself. The world is competitive. She needs tools. It was I who built the ruthless executive who today considered me a burden. I taught her that my pain was invisible and that her needs were urgent. I closed the blue folder. The diagnosis was complete. There was nothing more to analyze. Now was the time to act. I walked toward the landline phone anchored to the kitchen wall. I picked up the receiver and dialed a number from memory. It rang 4 times before a raspy voice, ruined by 40 years of cheap cigarettes, answered on the other end. "Yeah?" the voice grunted. "Brenda, it is Eleanor." There was a heavy silence, followed by the sound of a metal lighter and a deep exhale. Brenda had been my desk mate in the city basement for 3 decades. Together, we had survived 6 different mayors, staff cuts, and archive floods. She was a woman who did not understand diplomacy, but she knew the value of working-class loyalty. "Eleanor, you are alive," Brenda said, without hiding her relief. "I called your snobby daughter's house yesterday. The husband answered and told me you were resting and could not take calls. I told him not to mess with me, that I knew you always have your tea at that hour. Where are you?" "In my apartment. I just got here." "I am on my way. Do not move." She hung up without waiting for an answer. That was Brenda. An hour later, my doorbell rang with 3 short knocks and 1 long one, our old office code. I opened the door and there she was, with her hair dyed a loud red, wrapped in a thick wool coat and holding 2 full grocery bags. She walked in without asking for permission. She left the bags in the kitchen and planted herself in front of me. She scrutinized me from top to bottom with her dark, sharp eyes. "You look terrible. You have the color of old recycled paper," she judged, taking off her coat. "Sit down. I am going to make you some real tea, not that bagged garbage they probably gave you over there." I collapsed into the armchair while Brenda moved around my kitchen with the familiarity of someone who knows the terrain. I heard the water boil, the clinking of the porcelain cups. Within minutes, she was sitting across from me, pushing a steaming cup into my hands. "Speak," she ordered, taking a sip from her own cup. With the same neutral voice I used to read the inventory at the end of the month, I recounted the events of the last 7 days. I told her about the coldness of the house, the strict schedules, the isolation, the broken glass from this morning, and Jessica's screaming. I repeated to her, word for word, the phrase that had triggered my departure. "You are a burden. You should have stayed at the hospital so you would not ruin my week." Brenda did not interrupt. Her hands, stained with freckles and old scars, tightened around the cup until her knuckles turned white. When I finished my report, a deathly silence fell over the apartment. "And what did you do before leaving?" she finally asked, knowing my methodical nature. "I left my things in order. I did not break anything. I did not steal anything. I simply withdrew myself from the file. and I left her a recording on her glass table. A detailed memoir of all the times I was her foundation, so she understands exactly what rubble her supposed independence is built upon. Brenda let out a dry, bitter laugh, devoid of joy, but full of poetic justice. You are the most dangerous woman I know, Eleanor. People think that we grandmothers only know how to knit and cry in the corners. They do not know that those of us who spend our lives sorting out other people's disasters know exactly where the bodies are buried. I am not seeking revenge, Brenda. I am only seeking accuracy, I replied, taking a sip of the hot tea that finally brought some color back to my cheeks. Jessica has always believed that her success is an exclusive product of her brilliance. She needs the documents that prove otherwise, but before she listens to that recording, I need to secure my own perimeter. Brenda nodded, immediately understanding my language. What do you need me to do? She asked, taking a small notebook out of her pocket. I need you to come with me to the clinic on South Avenue. I cannot allow Jessica to continue being listed as my emergency contact, nor as the person responsible for my medical decisions. The moment she realizes I am gone, her first instinct will be to control the narrative. She will say I am senile, that I wandered off due to confusion caused by the medications. I need an official record that my mental faculties are intact and that my departure was voluntary and lucid. Done. Let us finish our tea and call a cab. I will make sure they see you right away. I know the head nurse there. At 12:30 in the afternoon, we were sitting in the office of Betty, the nursing supervisor at the community clinic. Betty was a sturdy woman with a stern face and an impeccable uniform who projected unquestionable authority. She had reviewed my medical file transferred from the hospital and was now taking my blood pressure with precise professional gestures. Your blood pressure is at acceptable levels, Ms. Eleanor. The pulse is steady. Dr. Davis did a good job with that stent, Betty said, typing the numbers into her tablet. However, you should be on strict bed rest. Your heart suffered a major trauma just a week ago. Walking down the street and moving without assistance is medically reckless. I understand the risks, Nurse Betty, I replied, looking her in the eyes with the firmness of someone who has made an irrevocable decision. But the environment I was in represented a greater risk to my recovery. Constant stress is detrimental to the cardiovascular system, is it not? Betty held my gaze for a long second. Her stern expression softened imperceptibly. As a woman of science who dealt with patients daily, she knew how to read between the lines. She understood perfectly what I was not saying about my daughter's house. Stress is a silent killer indeed, Betty conceded, nodding slowly. What procedure do you wish to carry out? I wish to revoke Jessica's status as my primary contact and the sole person authorized to receive my medical information. From this moment on, I am the sole person responsible for my decisions. In case of incapacitation, I designate Ms. Brenda, here present, as my emergency contact. Betty typed rapidly on her device. To make this change, given your recent medical history, I must certify that you are oriented in time, space, and person, and that you are acting on your own free will without coercion. I am Eleanor. I am 71 years old. It is Tuesday at the South Avenue Clinic. I worked 40 years cataloging municipal files. If you want, I can detail the archiving process for historical documents from before the Revolution, I said, without altering the tone of my voice a single millimeter. Betty gave a half smile. That will not be necessary. The system has been updated. Your daughter no longer has access to your medical records or the authority to make decisions regarding any future hospitalization. Everything will go directly to your personal email. We left the clinic at 1:15 in the afternoon. The sun had already warmed the city air a bit. Brenda walked me back to the apartment, made sure I had my medications organized on the nightstand, and said goodbye with the promise to return the next day first thing in the morning. I was left alone. The silence of the apartment was a protective embrace, not a threat. At 2:15 in the afternoon, the shrill ring of the landline phone shattered the calm. The antique ring echoed against the living room walls. I knew perfectly well who it was. My instinct told me not to answer, but the archivist knew that open files cause problems. It was necessary to put the final stamp on it. I walked to the kitchen, picked up the receiver, and brought it to my ear without saying a single word. "Mom!" Jessica's scream on the other end of the line was a mix of uncontrolled fury and social panic. "Where the hell are you?" "I am at my house, Jessica," I replied, with a calmness that seemed to infuriate her even more. "That is not your house. Your house is the room I set up for you here. Do you have any idea how much you scared me?" Her breathing was heavy. I could hear the echo of her heels pacing in circles, probably in her massive kitchen. Mark went downstairs to get a coffee and found the broken glass on the floor, the pills everywhere, and you were not there. He called me at the office right in the middle of my quarterly presentation. I had to suspend the meeting with the investors to come looking for you. Do you know how embarrassed I was? Mark thinks I abandoned you. The neighbors at the security booth say they saw you walking out alone toward the avenue, like a homeless person, Mom, as if I do not provide you with everything you need. I listened to her tirade without interrupting. I analyzed her words. She had not said, "Are you okay?" She had not said, "Does your chest hurt?" All her exclamations revolved around the impact my absence had on her image, her schedule, and her husband's perception. Her fear was not losing her mother. Her fear was looking like a bad daughter in front of others. "You have nothing to worry about, Jessica," I said when she ran out of breath to keep yelling. "Your image is safe. If anyone asks you, you can tell them I decided to return to my apartment of my own free will because I missed my space. No one will judge you." "Of course they are going to judge me," she shrieked. "You just had heart surgery. You cannot live alone. It is a huge risk. I am going to send Mark to get you right now. Pack your things again." "No, Jessica, you are not going to send anyone, and I am not going to pack anything." There was a silence on the other end of the line. The icy, absolute tone of my voice had thrown her off. She was used to my compliance, to my constant apologies for existing. This new Eleanor was a language she did not know how to speak. "What are you talking about, Mom?" "Stop acting like a spoiled child. We had a little friction this morning. I was stressed. It is over. You have to come back. I cannot bear the responsibility of you dying alone in that old hole." It was not a little friction. It was an audit of our relationship, and the balance turned out negative, I said, resting my free hand on the cold countertop of my kitchen. "This morning you informed me with total clarity that my presence was ruining your week and that I was a burden. I simply processed that information and executed the corresponding action. I eliminated the burden. I removed the obstacle from your perfect path. You no longer have to worry about my medication schedules, or the sound of my slow steps, or the glasses that my weak hands drop." "You are overreacting." She tried to defend herself, but her voice trembled for the first time. "You know how I get when I have quarter-end closings. You have always supported me." "And I continue to do so. I am supporting you by giving you the space you demanded." "Mom, Mark is furious. He says, how could we be so negligent? He is going to go get you." "If Mark or you show up at my building, I will not open the door. And if you try to force it, I will call the police. I already took care of revoking your authority over my medical files at the clinic. In the eyes of any institution, I am an adult in full possession of her mental faculties who has decided to live on her own property. Legally and logistically, you no longer have any jurisdiction over me." The silence that followed was dense, heavy with the disbelief of someone who has just crashed into a concrete wall at full speed. I heard her ragged breathing. "You cannot do this to me," she muttered, completely losing her executive posture. "What am I going to tell Andrew? What am I going to tell my in-laws this weekend?" "Tell them the truth or invent an efficient lie. You are brilliant at market strategies. I am sure you will find a way to sell my absence as an act of my own stubbornness." "Mom, please." That please was not love. It was panic at losing control of the narrative. I knew the difference. "By the way, Jessica," I added, my voice dropping a pitch, becoming even more precise. "On your glass table next to the design magazines, I left my old black dictaphone. I know your husband hates clutter, so I suggest you move it from there. But before you throw it away, press the green playback button. It is a detailed summary of our unsettled accounts. An audio file of everything you chose to forget." "What did you record on there?" she asked, and this time the fear in her voice was genuine, visceral. "Our history unadorned. Listen to it when you are alone, or do not. The record exists, regardless of whether you decide to face it or not." "You cannot leave me like this. Tell me what you left recorded," she screamed, desperation shattering her facade completely. "Have a very successful quarter-end closing, Jessica." I hung up the receiver. I did not put it back on the base. I left it on the kitchen counter, unplugging the phone cord from the wall. The silence that flooded the apartment was absolute, dense, and purifying. I walked slowly back to the living room. My chest hurt less. I went to the gray filing cabinet, opened the top drawer, and took out a spare set of keys and an old address book. I had secured my present and blocked her control. Now, the final step remained. I had to organize the final documents, the tangible evidence of every penny, every tear, and every sacrifice that had paved her way to the top. I was going to build a moral mirror so large and so detailed that Jessica would have nowhere to look without seeing her own reflection distorted by ingratitude, and I was not going to need a single lawyer to do it. The proof was already in my hands. The black faux leather cover of the address book felt rough under my fingertips. I left it on the dining table, right next to the bunch of spare keys I had taken from the top drawer. The silence in my apartment was absolute, dense, almost palpable. It was a clean silence, devoid of the hysterical urgency that permeated the walls of Jessica's house. I sat on one of the wooden chairs, resting my hands flat on the glass surface of the table, and closed my eyes for a moment. My chest ached with a rhythmic throb, a dull echo of the heart attack, reminding me that my time and energy were now limited resources. I could no longer waste them on empty arguments or defending my right to exist. I stood up slowly, resting the weight of my body on the back of the chair before taking the first step toward the gray filing cabinet. The 4 metal drawers watched me from the corner of the room like mute guardians of my history. I opened the 3rd drawer, the one that housed the oldest and heaviest files. The sound of the metal rails sliding cut through the air with industrial precision. The smell of old paper, settled dust, and dried ink rose immediately, filling my lungs with the comforting aroma of documented truth. My fingers, nimble despite age and exhaustion, began to walk over the cardboard tabs of the hanging folders. I skipped the tax section, ignored the utility bills from the past decade, and stopped at a thick, red folder worn from use. The label, written in my straight, unadorned handwriting, read, "Health and Survival." I pulled the folder out with both hands. It was heavy. It weighed as much as the sacrifices that are never spoken aloud. I carried it to the table and opened it under the white light of the ceiling lamp. The first document I pulled out was a yellowing receipt, almost transparent from the passage of decades, issued by the Memorial Clinic in the winter of 1986. Touching the brittle texture of that paper, the cold of that November dawn returned to my bones with overwhelming clarity. Jessica was barely 10 years old. She had been burning with a fever for 3 days that would not break with cold compresses, or the cheap syrups the neighborhood pharmacy had let me buy on credit. That night, her breathing turned into a high-pitched wheeze, a raspy, desperate sound that froze my blood. I wrapped her in 2 wool blankets, carried her in my arms even though she was already a big, heavy girl, and ran through the rain to the public hospital. They turned us away in the emergency room. There were no beds, no oxygen, no available doctors. The image of my daughter, pale with purple lips, gasping for air in the crowded waiting room, pushed me to make a decision that would put me in debt for years. I ran 3 more blocks to the private clinic. We walked in soaked, leaving a trail of dirty water on the immaculate marble floor of the lobby. The on-call doctor stabilized her with oxygen and intravenous antibiotics, but the administrator intercepted me in the hallway with a pricing chart that equaled a full year of my salary at the city archive. I did not cry. I did not beg. The next day, I sold my sewing machine, pawned my late parents' wedding rings, and took a second job mopping the floors of an industrial bakery at dawn, right before my shift in the city basement. For 3 years, I slept an average of 4 hours a night to pay off that debt. And during the 2 weeks Jessica was hospitalized, I sat in a rigid plastic chair next to her bed, holding her small hand, whispering in her ear, "Mom is here. I will not let you fall. Breathe easy." I looked at the yellowing receipt on my dining table. The contrast was an open wound. When my heart failed, when my arteries closed up and I fell to the floor gasping for air exactly like she did 35 years ago, Jessica shoved me into a guest room, forbade me from making a mess in her kitchen, and screamed that I was a burden, ruining her schedule. The archivist in my mind took the receipt from 1986, removed the rusty paperclip holding it, and placed it in the center of the table, inaugurating the first pillar of evidence. The night fell over the city without me noticing. The light from the street lamps outside began to filter through the half-closed blinds, drawing orange lines across my living room walls. I got up slowly, went to the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of tap water. I opened my plastic organizer and took out the cholesterol pill and the blood thinner. I swallowed them in silence, feeling the trail of cold water sliding down my throat. My body was exhausted, but my mind was operating with the ruthless clarity of a surgeon. There was no room for self-pity. I had a file to close. I went back to the filing cabinet and opened the fourth drawer. This one was almost empty, reserved for those documents that defied ordinary classification. From there, I pulled out a clear plastic sleeve. Inside, protected from moisture and the passage of time, rested a white, unwrinkled envelope with a postmark from 1991. The handwriting on the return address was messy, hurried, unmistakable. It was Richard's handwriting. I sat back down at the table and slid the letter out of its sleeve. The paper crinkled slightly. It was the only written communication my ex-husband had sent me since the day he packed his things and vanished from our lives. The memory of the day the mailman handed me that envelope hit me with the force of a physical impact. Jessica was 15 years old then. She was going through a furious adolescence, full of slam doors, screaming matches, and deep resentment toward our modest life. She idolized the absent figure of her father. In her teenage mind, Richard was an adventurer, a misunderstood man who had to leave because I was too boring, too strict, too gray to keep him. I absorbed her daily insults in silence, letting her blame me for the broken family just to protect her self-esteem. That Tuesday afternoon, I opened Richard's letter standing by the window. The text was brief, cowardly, and brutal. It read, "Eleanor, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that you are looking for me regarding the girls' school. Stop looking for me. I was not born to be a father. The girl suffocates me with her demands, and you were always too accommodating with her. I have built a new life where there is no room for the past. I leave you the house, the furniture, and the problem. Do not write to me again." That same afternoon, Jessica came home from high school furious because I could not buy her the brand-name shoes all her friends were wearing. She threw her backpack on the floor and screamed in my face, "This is why my dad left you, because you are a conformist loser. If he were here, he would give me everything I deserve. I wish he had taken me with him." I had the letter in my apron pocket. I felt the weight of the paper against my thigh. I could have pulled it out. I could have thrown it in her face and forever destroyed the fantasy of the loving, absent father. I could have shown her that the man she idolized considered her a suffocating problem. But I looked her in the eyes. I saw the fragility behind her fury, and I chose the pain of being the villain in her story, rather than allowing her to feel like an unwanted daughter. I stayed silent. I took the broom. I swept up the dirt she had tracked in with her shoes, and that night I filed Richard's letter in the plastic sleeve, sealing the secret under lock and key. For decades, I carried the guilt of an abandonment I did not commit. Jessica built her identity on the certainty that her mother was the anchor dragging her down, and that she had to be successful to compensate for my mediocrity. Now, reading Richard's words under the light of the lamp, I realized that the protective shield I had crafted for her had become the weapon with which she was stabbing me today. I placed Richard's letter next to the medical receipt. The second pillar was ready. I slept in my own bed that night, the worn cotton sheets wrapped around me with a familiarity that my daughter's guest room could never match. I woke up at 6 in the morning, before the sun fully rose. The pain in my chest was barely a dull murmur. I got up, dressed in dark wool pants and a well-pressed blouse, and brewed a full pot of coffee. I knew Brenda would not be long. At 8 o'clock sharp, the 3 short knocks and 1 long one echoed on the door. I opened it, and Brenda blew in like a gust of wind, bringing the cold morning air and a brown paper bag full of freshly baked pastries with her. "It smells like coffee and revolution in this place," she said, taking off her scarf and throwing it over the back of the armchair. "How did that heart of yours wake up today, beating to its own rhythm?" I replied, walking into the kitchen to pour her a steaming cup. Brenda took the cup, took a sip, and walked over to the dining table. She stopped dead when she saw the open folders and the documents aligned with military symmetry. Her dark eyes scanned the papers. As a good archivist, she needed no explanations to understand the language of dates and stamps. "You are building a bomb, Eleanor," Brenda murmured, slowly lowering the cup. "I know that look of yours. It is the same one you had when you discovered the mayor's embezzlement in '98 and sent the anonymous files to the press." "It is not a bomb, Brenda. It is a mirror," I corrected her, approaching the table with my own cup of tea. Jessica has lived her entire life looking at herself in a distorted glass, believing her pedestal holds itself up in thin air. It is time to show her the real foundation. "And what are you missing? Because I see the letter from your useless ex-husband, and I see the clinic receipts from when the brat almost died of asthma. Is there more?" I nodded silently. I walked to the filing cabinet one last time. I opened the top drawer, the most recent one. I pulled out a thin green folder labeled Financial Obligations. I returned to the table, opened it, and extracted a bank loan contract, stapled to a payment schedule that spanned 10 whole years. The signatures on the last page were in blue ink. The date, April 2005. Brenda leaned over the table, adjusting the reading glasses hanging from her neck on a metal chain. She read the loan amount and let out a low, drawn-out whistle. $50,000? Eleanor, this is a fortune. Why on earth did you take out this loan 15 years ago? You do not travel. You do not buy expensive furniture. You have no luxuries. "It was for Jessica's wedding," I replied, my voice stripped of any emotional inflection. The memory of that year materialized in the center of the room. Jessica was marrying Mark. His family belonged to a social class that looked down on people like me, bankers, investors, property owners. When the wedding preparations began, Jessica went into a state of constant panic. Mark's mother had hired a luxury event planner and paid for the main ballroom at the most exclusive club in the city. Jessica, terrified of looking inferior, of being exposed as the daughter of a municipal archivist, demanded that I cover the cost of her designer dress, the embossed invitations, and the banquet for her side of the family. "This is my only wedding, Mom. I am not going to let your limitations ruin my image in front of Mark's partners. I need you to help me or I will be the laughingstock of everyone," she had told me, crying in this very dining room. I went to the city employee credit union. I put my apartment up as collateral. I signed a loan with an abusive interest rate that forced me to cancel my retirement contributions for an entire decade. I bought the Italian silk dress. I paid for the imported flowers. On the day of the wedding, I arrived at the club wearing a plum-colored dress that I had made myself during my free nights. I felt dignified, proud to see my daughter walking down the aisle. But when we moved to the reception, I discovered my place. Jessica did not sit me at the head table with Mark's parents. They assigned me seat number 8 at table 14, located in the darkest corner of the ballroom, right next to the swinging doors where the sweaty waiters went in and out with food trays. I shared dinner with 3 of Mark's distant great-aunts, who were half-deaf, and the hired photographer. Halfway through the night, Jessica approached my table on the arm of the executive director of Mark's firm. The man, dressed in an impeccable tuxedo, looked at me curiously. "Sir, let me introduce you to my mother," Jessica said with a tense smile, squeezing her husband's arm. "She works at City Hall, sorting old files. She is almost retired, thankfully. She lives a very simple life." The director nodded with empty politeness and quickly walked away. Jessica did not invite me to dance. She did not ask me to be in the main photographs with her in-laws. She hid me the way you hide an old, rickety piece of furniture when important guests come over. I stayed seated at table 14, drinking mineral water that tasted like ash, feeling the rough texture of my homemade dress while I watched my daughter shine in the Italian silk that I would pay for with my sweat until the year 2015. "This is the proof of her shame," I told Brenda, tapping the loan contract with the tip of my index finger. "This document proves that the elegance with which she despises me today was financed with the blood of the woman she calls a burden." Brenda looked up from the document. Her eyes shined with a mixture of fierce indignation and absolute respect for my method. "What are you going to do with this, Eleanor?" she asked, lowering her voice as if we were planning a heist. "If you mail it to her, she will tear it into 1,000 pieces and deny ever receiving it. If you hand it to her when you are alone, she will scream that you are crazy, that you forged the papers, or that you are cashing in on motherly favors. I know her type. Executives never accept defeat if there are no witnesses." "You are absolutely right, Brenda. A document only has power if it is presented before the proper court, and Jessica's court is not me. Her court is her public image, the perception her husband and her social circle have of her." I walked over to the filing cabinet and took out a legal-sized manila envelope, thick and reinforced at the edges. I placed it on the table. With slow, precise movements, I took the medical receipt for the pneumonia from 1986 and put it in the envelope. Then, the original letter from Richard repudiating his paternity. Finally, the bank loan contract with which I financed her high society farce at the wedding. I did not write an explanatory note. I did not draft a letter full of reproaches or moral lessons. Documents do not need narrators. Documents speak for themselves. They carry the undeniable weight of dried ink, official dates, and signatures that cannot be erased. I closed the manila envelope and secured the metal clasp on the back. "Tomorrow, Friday, is the end of the quarter at Jessica's company," I said, looking Brenda in the eyes. I know her schedule by heart because she screamed it at me all week. At 7 in the evening, she and Mark have their annual gala dinner with the board of directors and the main investors. It is the most important event of their fiscal year. They are going to be at the terrace restaurant of the Central Hotel. Her entire life, her reputation, and her status will be gathered in that glass ballroom. Brenda widened into a slow smile, showing her teeth, understanding exactly where I was going. "You want it delivered there, right in the middle of her show." "I do not want an anonymous messenger to hand it to her, Brenda. If a waiter gives it to her, she will put it in her purse and pretend it is junk mail. I need this file to reach her hands and Mark's hands in a way they cannot ignore or hide. I need the contents of this envelope to be the center of gravity of their night." I walked over to the window and looked out at the street. The morning traffic was already roaring on the avenue, oblivious to the precision operation brewing in my third-floor apartment. My chest no longer hurt. My breathing flowed freely, without obstacles. I had spent an entire lifetime cataloging other people's history in absolute silence. But today, I was writing my own. I turned around and handed the thick manila envelope to my old friend. "Would you wear your best coat tomorrow night, Brenda? I need you to be my custodian of the truth. I need you to walk through those glass doors, walk right up to the main table, and hand the final file to my daughter, right in front of the eyes of the husband who thinks I am a parasite, and the partners who think she is a self-made woman." Brenda took the envelope with both hands. She weighed the package, feeling the moral weight it contained, and nodded with a firmness that sealed our pact. The file was closed. Now all that was left was to wait for Jessica to open the cover and face, for the first time in her life, the abyss of her own history. And I did not plan to be there to pick up the pieces when her perfection shattered. I planned to be right here, in my home, drinking my tea in absolute and glorious silence. Friday dawned with a timid grayish light slipping through the cracks of my bedroom blinds, drawing parallel lines on the worn cotton sheets. I woke up at 6 in the morning, long before the grandfather clock in the kitchen struck the official hour. The silence in my apartment was thick, protective, almost tangible. There were no heels rushing against the hallway floorboards, no phones ringing with hysterical urgency, no sighs of annoyance at my slow walking pace. I sat on the edge of the bed, rested my bare feet on the cold hardwood floor, and brought my right hand to the exact center of my chest. The sharp stabbing pain of the previous days had subsided, fading into a dull ache, a constant reminder that my body had been on the verge of total collapse and now demanded respect and calm. I put on my slippers and walked to the kitchen with measured steps. I filled the old aluminum kettle with tap water and turned on the stove. The sound of the gas igniting and the faint hiss of the heating water were the only soundtrack to my morning. While I waited, I took a damp cloth and watered the 3 potted ferns adorning the windowsill. The green leaves were firm, reaching for the little light the city had to offer. Caring for something that responds to water and attention with silent growth felt like a brutal contrast to the years I spent watering my daughter's inflated ego, only to harvest contempt and disdain at the moment of my greatest vulnerability. I took my medications with military punctuality. The white blood pressure pill at 7 o'clock sharp, the blood thinner at 12, the cholesterol statin saved for the night. I wrote down the exact time in my yellow notebook with my black ink pen. My pulse was stable, 65 beats per minute. My mind was operating with a methodical coldness that scared me a little, but throughout the morning I dedicated myself to cleaning the apartment. I swept up the dust gathered under the heavy furniture, dusted the wooden shelves where I kept my mystery novels, and organized the pantry, aligning the cans by their expiration dates. It was a physical and deeply symbolic cleaning. I was preparing the ground for the next stage of my life, one where there would be no room for lies financed with my sweat, nor for humiliations disguised as favors. At 2 in the afternoon, I had vegetable noodle soup and a piece of toast for lunch. I ate slowly, savoring every bite without the oppressive pressure of having to clear the table so someone else could set up a laptop or financial charts. The afternoon crept by with the heavy slowness of an old-fashioned Sunday. I sat in the mustard armchair with a book in my lap, but I never made it past the first page. My mind was projecting the scenarios of the upcoming night. I knew perfectly well that Jessica and Mark would be getting ready for their big corporate event. I could picture my daughter in front of the full-length mirror in her massive walk-in closet, adjusting the neckline of a silk dress that cost more than I made in 3 months working at the archive, practicing that rehearsed, empty smile she reserved exclusively for people she deemed useful for her social climb. At 5:30 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang with the familiar 3 short knocks and 1 long one. I opened the door and almost did not recognize the woman standing on the other side of the threshold. Brenda had left behind her baggy wool sweaters, worn corduroy pants, and orthopedic shoes. She was wearing an impeccably tailored navy blue suit, a white silk blouse buttoned up to the neck, and low-heeled but extremely elegant shoes. Her loud red hair was pulled back into a neat tight bun, and her lips were painted a dark crimson that gave her an undeniable air of authority. She looked like the ruthless director of an international bank branch, not a retired archivist who spent her life sorting old papers in a city basement. "Do not say a single word about my appearance, Eleanor," Brenda warned me, stepping into the apartment with a firm stride and dropping an elegant black leather purse on the dining table. "This suit cost me half my holiday bonus 5 years ago for my brother-in-law's funeral, and I swore on everything holy that I would not wear it again until someone else died. I suppose today we are going to bury an entire reputation, so the occasion more than calls for it." "You look absolutely commanding, Brenda," I said, double locking the door and walking over to the table. "That is exactly the idea. Men in suits and ties only respect people who dress like them. If I show up at the hotel in my Saturday grocery shopping clothes, the security guards will toss me out the service door before I can even get close to the glass ballroom. Camouflage is half the battle." She walked to the table and looked at the thick manila envelope that was still there, exactly where we had left it the night before, jealously guarding the evidence of my sacrifice. She picked it up carefully, checking the fold of the paper and the metal clasp securing the documents. "The company event starts at 7 in the evening," Brenda said, glancing at her leather strap wristwatch. "At 7:30 on the dot, they serve the first course, and the investor appreciation speeches begin. That is the critical moment, when everyone is seated with their glasses full of imported wine and their attention fixed on the head table. But I have been thinking all afternoon, Eleanor. It is not fair that I get to have all the fun ruining their theater of perfection while you stay here, locked up, staring at the paint on the walls. You need to be there. You need to see them fall." "I cannot go, Brenda. You know that." "My physical presence would ruin the effect of the document," I replied, shaking my head. "If they see me walk in, Jessica will deflect the attention toward my health. She will say I am senile. She will make a dramatic scene. She will play the victim, claiming I am harassing her at work. The file needs to speak for itself, without my tired face giving her an excuse for her behavior." I know. "You're right about that," Brenda replied, opening her leather purse and pulling out a black cell phone, a simple but rugged-looking model. "That is why I came up with another strategy. You will not be there in person, but you are going to have front-row seats for the show." She handed me the device. I looked at it with obvious confusion, not understanding what she was getting at. "I have the wireless earbuds my nephew gave me for Christmas that I never knew how to use until today," she explained, pulling 2 small black earpieces out of a clear plastic case. "I am going to put one in my right ear, well hidden under my hair. I am going to call your landline right before I walk into the glass ballroom. You are going to pick up the receiver and just listen in absolute silence. The microphone on this phone is extremely sensitive. You are going to hear every word, every panicked gasp, and every pathetic excuse your daughter tries to babble in front of her bosses." The idea seemed as brilliant as it was terrifying, listening to the downfall live, witnessing, through the telephone wire in my humble living room, the exact moment when the structure of lies Jessica had built over the years collapsed like a house of cards under a fan. "Are you absolutely sure this will work?" a part of me asked, feeling a slight tingle of anticipation in the palms of my hands. "I tested it at the farmer's market this very morning. I put the phone in my breast pocket, and my neighbor heard exactly what the butcher charged me for a pound of meat. It will work perfectly. You just sit in your mustard armchair, hold the receiver, and enjoy the final audit." At 6:15 in the evening, Brenda tucked the manila envelope into her black purse. We looked at each other in silence for a long moment. There was no need for motivational farewell speeches or dramatic, tearful hugs. We were 2 working-class women, hardened by disappointments, about to collect on an immense moral debt that had been accumulating unpaid interest for decades. "I will see you later, Eleanor," she said, and walked out the door, leaving behind a faint trail of lavender perfume and unbreakable determination. I was completely alone. The wall clock read 6:20. The hands seemed to be moving through a pool of clear molasses. I walked into the kitchen, picked up the phone cord I had left unplugged the day before to avoid my daughter's screaming, and plugged it firmly back into the wall jack. I checked for a dial tone. The steady humming sound confirmed that the communication channel was open and ready. I brewed a cup of chamomile tea. My movements were slow, calculated, almost choreographed. I did not want to raise my heart rate under any circumstances. The cardiologist at the hospital had given me a strict warning about strong emotions, but I knew this was not an uncontrolled emotion. This was the necessary closure of a painful file. It was an act of bureaucratic justice for the soul. I carried the steaming cup to the living room and sat in the mustard armchair, placing the base of the landline phone on the side table, right within reach of my left hand. Outside, the city was beginning to turn on its night lights. The traffic intensified, turning into a constant murmur of heavy engines and distant horns filtering through the closed windows. I imagined Brenda sitting in the back of a taxi, crossing the illuminated avenues, holding the black purse on her lap with the same protective grip we used to hold confidential files on the shelves of the city archive. At 7 o'clock sharp, the sky was already a dark, heavy vault. The corporate gala for Jessica's company had officially begun. I visualized the glass ballroom on the rooftop of the Central Hotel. I knew it by heart from the society magazines Jessica would strategically leave lying around on her coffee table for me to see. I knew about the thick Persian rugs that silence footsteps, the massive chandeliers hanging from the ceiling, reflecting light through thousands of crystals, the round tables covered in immaculate white linen tablecloths, the waiters moving gracefully carrying gleaming silver trays. I knew that the money men would be sitting at the head table, men in tailored suits with cold smiles, evaluating every gesture Jessica and Mark made, deciding if they were perfect and flawless enough to handle their multi-million-dollar investments for another fiscal year. At 7:25 in the evening, the landline in my living room rang. The sharp metallic ring startled me, even though I had been waiting for it for an hour. I set my teacup down on the glass table, wiped the cold sweat from my palms on the fabric of my dark pants, and picked up the receiver on the second ring, bringing it slowly to my ear. "Eleanor?" Brenda's voice whispered. There was a complex background noise, an elegant murmur made up of the soft notes of live violins playing and overlapping voices, conversing in low, polite tones. "I hear you loud and clear, Brenda," I replied, pressing the warm plastic of the receiver against my cheek. "I am in the main lobby of the glass ballroom. Absolutely no one stopped me. This dead man's suit is magic. Security opened the double doors for me, thinking I am the external auditor for the firm. I can see the head table from here. Your daughter is wearing a black silk dress that costs more than the down payment on my house." Mark is sitting next to her, nodding like a wind-up toy at everything an older man with a vulture face is saying. I am going to slip the phone into my breast pocket right now. Do not speak under any circumstances. Just listen. Here I go. There was the rustle of scratchy fabric, and then the ambient sound of the ballroom was suddenly amplified in my ear. The murmur of exclusive conversations became much sharper. I could hear the delicate clinking of heavy silver cutlery against fine porcelain, the high-pitched chime of crystal glasses toasting to financial success, firm footsteps on a plush carpet. They were Brenda's footsteps, marching inexorably toward the epicenter of my daughter's farce. My heart beat heavily in my aching chest, but not with physical pain. It was the clean, purifying adrenaline of the truth that was about to come to light after decades of darkness. And that is why we are completely certain that the growth margin for the upcoming quarter will exceed all initial expectations. Arthur. That was Mark's unmistakable voice, loaded with a sickly sweet flattery that turned my stomach from a distance. Excellent projection, Mark. And Jessica, your presentation this morning on resource optimization was flawless. You have a killer instinct for business. You do not let emotions get in the way. We really like that on the board, replied a deep, gravelly, and authoritative voice, probably the man Brenda had described as the lead investor. Thank you so much, Arthur. Coming from you, it is an honor. My daughter's voice sounded crystal clear, fake, perfectly modulated to please. As I always tell my team, success is never a matter of luck. It is pure discipline, self-sacrifice, and never letting personal obstacles distract you from your professional goals. I am a self-made woman, working tirelessly since I was very young, without relying on anyone else's resources. I squeezed my eyes shut in my armchair. I am a self-made woman, Jessica's fetish phrase. The advertising slogan of her life, built on the denial of my existence. Suddenly, the sound of someone clearing their throat cut through the conversation at the head table. It was a dry, raspy, authoritative sound, expelled from Brenda's lungs. "Good evening, everyone. I am terribly sorry to interrupt this moving celebration of financial independence and personal effort." My friend's voice echoed across the ballroom with chilling clarity, bringing the clinking of glasses to a halt. An absolute, heavy, dense silence fell over that part of the restaurant. I could imagine the investors' heads turning slowly toward her, evaluating her navy blue suit. "Excuse me, who are you? This is a strictly private company event," Mark demanded, his tone shifting from fawning flattery to defensive annoyance in a single millisecond. "Brenda." Jessica's voice trembled noticeably. She only uttered the two-syllable name. But in that brief exhale, I heard the raw, irrational panic of someone who sees a vengeful ghost crash their coronation party. "What the hell are you doing here? How did you get into this room?" "By walking through the front door, Jessica. Luxury places have terrible security if you show up wearing the right fabric," Brenda replied, unbothered, her voice dripping with icy irony. "Do not worry. I am not here to sit down and have dinner with you. I am just here to make an official, urgent delivery from the records department of your past." The crinkle of the manila envelope being dropped heavily onto the white linen tablecloth was picked up by the microphone with total clarity. It sounded like a muffled gunshot in the middle of the silence. "What is this stupidity? Brenda, take that and leave right now. Security is going to escort her out the service exit immediately," Jessica hissed, desperately lowering her voice to avoid alarming the rest of the guests in the room. But the microphone in Brenda's pocket was close enough to capture her terror. "These are accounting documents you forgot to include in your brilliant presentation on how you are a self-made woman without anyone's help," Brenda said, without moving a single muscle, projecting her voice so the vulture investor would hear her. "Eleanor thought your husband and the distinguished board of directors would be interested in meeting the true financiers behind your meteoric success, especially since you call those financiers a burden when their hearts fail them and they break a sad glass in your kitchen. Get her out of here, Mark. She is completely crazy. She's a bitter old woman from my mother's municipal office," Jessica screamed, losing her temper and her executive composure entirely. I heard the violent scrape of a chair being pushed back as if Mark were jumping to his feet. "One moment, please," Arthur's deep voice interrupted. There was genuine curiosity and an unshakable authority in his measured tone. "What kind of financial documents are those?" "Nothing important, Arthur, I swear to you, please. It is just family nonsense from bitter people," Jessica pleaded, and the rush sound of her hands trying to snatch the envelope off the table was clearly audible through the receiver. But Mark, fueled by the distrust that was already eating away at his marriage, was much faster than she was. "Let me see this right now," Mark said, his voice cold and devoid of any affection. "If your mother sent this woman to make a public scene at my annual dinner in front of the partners, I want to know exactly what the hell she is trying to prove." There was the loud scrape of the metal clasp being forced open, the thick manila paper tearing slightly in the rush, and a few seconds of reading silence that felt like hours. I squeezed the receiver in my living room, my knuckles white, visualizing Mark's eyes scanning the worn papers under the bright light of the chandeliers. "What is this?" Mark muttered, and his tone was no longer one of arrogant annoyance, but of absolute disbelief and bewilderment. An emergency room medical receipt from a clinic in 1986? Why would your mother keep the payment for your pneumonia? Keep reading the attachments, kid. The file is just getting started, Brenda encouraged him, with a lethal calmness, savoring every second. A letter, signed by your father, your dad. Dated in the year 91, Mark read, his voice rising just enough so that all the investors sitting at the table could hear perfectly. I was not born to be a father. The girl suffocates me with her demands. I leave you the house, the furniture, and the problem. Do not look for me. Mark, for the love of God, do not read that garbage out loud. Give it to me. It is fake, Jessica screamed. There was the sound of a minor scuffle, the clink of a glass tipping over, a dull thud against the fine wood of the table. Let go of my arm, Mark exploded, completely losing his patience. You told me, looking me right in the eyes, that your father was a successful businessman who died tragically in an accident in Europe. You told me he left you a hidden trust fund that you used to pay for your private education. The only trust fund your distinguished wife ever had was her mother's sweat, mopping the floors of an industrial bakery at dawn while she slept. Brenda chimed in, relentless, driving the moral knife all the way to the hilt. And what is this? Mark's voice was now tinged with a deep personal humiliation, the humiliation of a man conned at his own game. An official bank loan contract, $50,000 from April of the year 2005, with a mortgage guarantee on your mother's humble apartment. The stated purpose of the loan, wedding expenses. The silence that followed that documented revelation was the most beautiful and pure sound I had ever heard in my 71 years of life. It was the unmistakable sound of a pedestal of arrogance crumbling in slow motion in front of a relentless jury. You swore to me, Mark said, enunciating every word with an evident blood-curdling disgust, that the money to pay for our wedding from your side of the family came exclusively from your personal savings as a junior executive, that your mother was a simple, low-level employee who did not have a pot to piss in, and that is why we sat her at the back of the room next to the kitchen doors. You told me you were ashamed of her poverty and her lack of class. It was to protect our corporate image, Mark. You know exactly what your family is like. They would have judged us, Jessica whimpered, abandoning any trace of the ironclad executive who terrorized her subordinates. Her voice was that of a small, cornered girl, the same selfish girl who demanded expensive coats and was deeply ashamed of my hands, cracked by the archive dust. My family and this board of directors value financial transparency and honesty above any other social attribute, Arthur, the lead investor, interjected with an icy coldness that sliced through the air in the room. And if you are capable of lying systematically about who financed your own wedding, if you are capable of hiding your own mother after she mortgaged the roof over her head for your delusions of grandeur, I do not even want to imagine what kind of lies you are capable of hiding in our company's quarterly balance sheets. Arthur, sir, please. I swear this is a strictly personal matter. It has nothing to do with my performance at the company, Jessica begged, pleading in front of everyone present. A person's moral character is exactly the same in their living room as it is in the boardroom, Jessica, Arthur declared with a voice made of granite. I heard the definitive clinking of silverware being set down on a porcelain plate, signaling the end of his appetite and his patience. Mark, we will speak first thing Monday morning in my office. We will review all the accounting ledgers again, with a team of external auditors this time. Have a very good night. Heavy chairs were heard dragging across the carpet, multiple footsteps rushing away. The head table was emptying out like a sinking ship. Jessica began to breathe erratically, hyperventilating loudly near the microphone. Do you realize the magnitude of what you just did with your inferiority complex? Mark hissed at Jessica, with a contained fury that was truly terrifying. You just scared off the lead investor of the decade, and you publicly humiliated me in front of my entire board of directors. You are an absolute fraud, Jessica. A damn cardboard fraud built on the broken back of the elderly woman you threw out on the street yesterday morning because she ruined your schedule. Do not leave me alone here, Mark. Everyone is looking at us. She cried out, seized by stage fright. Grab a cab on your way out. I do not want to see you in my house tonight or anywhere near my son, he replied bluntly. His firm footsteps quickly walked away, blending in with the frightened and inquisitive murmurs from the neighboring tables. Brenda waited, standing for a few more seconds. The microphone in her pocket picked up Jessica's muffled crying, a dry sob stripped of all dignity, the desperate weeping of someone who has just lost the only shiny mirror she liked to look at herself in. Original documents cannot be destroyed or altered, Jessica, Brenda said, her voice dropping in volume but maintaining the relentless firmness of a judge handing down a sentence in an empty courtroom. Your mother sends her warmest regards from her independence, and she suggests that the next time you brag about being a self-made woman, you do not forget to keep the receipts. There was the loud rustle of fabric once again. Brenda pulled the phone out of her pocket, and the ambient sound changed texture. Did you hear the whole report, Eleanor? She asked directly into the device, already walking with a triumphant stride toward the exit of the luxurious glass ballroom. Every syllable, Brenda. Every documented word, I replied. My voice was incredibly steady, even though a solitary, heavy, warm tear rolled slowly down my left cheek. It was not a tear of sadness or loss. It was simply the immense pressure of 35 years of silence and submission, finally escaping from my tired body. Mission accomplished and file closed. I am going to have a double cognac at the downstairs bar, to the health of archivists everywhere. And then I am going home to take off this armor. Sleep soundly, my friend. The audit was a success. Thank you, Brenda. You are the best custodian a historical archive could ask for. The line disconnected with a sharp click. The irregular buzzing dial tone returned to my ear, monotonous, constant, and strangely peaceful. I lowered the receiver very slowly and placed it carefully on the black plastic base. The living room of my small apartment was bathed in a gentle, welcoming dimness. The light from the orange street lamps on the avenue continued filtering through the window, illuminating the golden dust floating in the air. I looked at my two hands, resting lifelessly on the fabric in my lap. They were old hands stained by time, with prominent blue veins and knuckles thickened by the endless hours of sorting heavy boxes in a windowless basement. They were the exact same hands that had lovingly sewn that plum-colored dress so as not to look out of place. The same trembling hands that had dropped the pill case onto the immaculate floor of my daughter's massive kitchen just a few days ago. But tonight, those hands were not trembling in the slightest. They were still, steady, in absolute and well-deserved rest. I had delivered the evidence where it belonged. I had exposed the naked truth in front of the only witnesses who truly mattered to my daughter. The flawless executive who considered me a logistical burden had been reduced to a pitiful fraud in front of the very elite investors she idolized so much. I leaned back against the soft backrest of the mustard armchair and closed my eyes, letting the silence of my own home envelop me. My chest did not hurt at all. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air enter my lungs without encountering any resistance. The file of my motherhood was closed, sealed, and archived forever. The only thing left now was to watch the dust of time settle peacefully over the smoldering ruins of her arrogance. A full 8 months have passed since that night when the silence returned to claim its rightful place in the center of my living room. The paper calendar hanging on my kitchen wall now marks the second week of May, and the light filtering through the half-open blinds no longer has that grayish, timid, almost pale glow of deep winter. Now it is a vibrant, thick, and warm sun that floods the hardwood floor every morning, drawing golden rectangles on the polished wood. My daily routine has become a mechanism of unalterable precision, a Swiss watch with perfect gears, but no longer driven by the fear of being a burden in someone else's life, but by the simple, pure, and resounding pleasure of existing at my own pace. I wake up at 7 o'clock sharp, without the need for shrill alarms or sudden jolts. My chest, which for so long was a dark cavern of painful echoes and metallic stabs that cut off my breath, now expands with the natural ease of a healthy, repaired bellows. The tiny stent that Dr. Davis meticulously placed in my blocked artery has fully integrated into my body. It has become a silent and fundamental part of my internal machinery, reminding me with every steady beat that survival requires both the skill of medical science and the unbreakable will not to let yourself be extinguished by the cruelty of others. I prepare my chamomile tea with the deliberate slowness that only true freedom grants. I watch the steam rise in slow spirals from the white porcelain cup, the exact same cup that less than a year ago I would wash in secret and dry with an irrational panic, so as not to leave traces of my presence in my daughter's massive kitchen. Now, the cup rests on my dining table for as long as I decide it should rest. I water my ferns with room temperature water, caressing the green leaves that have grown with unusual strength this spring. I take my medications with military discipline, recording every dose in my yellow notebook with my black ink pen, the blood pressure pill, the blood thinner, the cholesterol pill. My pulse remains at a constant, strong, and peaceful 68 beats per minute. My body, which almost a year ago collapsed under the overwhelming weight of ingratitude and physical exhaustion, has found its own balance, rebuilding itself cell by cell in the protective quiet of this small third-floor apartment. I've gained back the weight I had lost, the color has returned to my cheeks, and my hands no longer shake when holding a glass tumbler. At 10 in the morning, my doorbell gives off the now classic 3 short knocks and 1 long one. I do not need to look through the small brass peephole. I turn the key gently, slide the deadbolt, and open the wooden door to welcome Brenda. My old friend is no longer wearing that impeccable structured navy blue suit she used as armor at the Central Hotel. She has returned to her everyday battle uniform, the one that defines her best. Mustard-colored corduroy pants, a thick hand-knit wool sweater, and her inseparable rubber-soled orthopedic shoes. Her loud red hair continues to defy any social convention about age and discretion. And in her weathered hands, she carries a heavy brown paper bag that exhales a sweet, thick, comforting aroma of freshly baked bread and ground cinnamon. It smells like peace in this place, Eleanor. Peace and settled dust, just as it should be, Brenda announces, walking into the apartment with a firm step and placing the bag on the kitchen counter. I brought you some vanilla sweet bread from the bakery on the corner. They just took them out of the oven, and the boy at the counter assured me they do not have that much butter, so your heart does not have permission to complain. My heart is not complaining about absolutely anything lately, Brenda, I answer, closing the door and walking toward the cupboard to pull out 2 small ceramic plates. Sit down. The water is already boiling. We settle at the dining table, the exact same spot where 8 months ago we put together the file that would change the course of our stories. Brenda breaks a pastry in half, blows the steam off her black coffee cup, and looks at me with those dark, sharp eyes full of a street smarts that the years have not managed to dull. Over these months, Brenda has become my main source of information, my connection to the outside world, and to the fallout from that night in the glass ballroom. Like a good archivist, she never stopped monitoring the closing of the case. Your daughter's file finally has the definitive red stamp, Eleanor, she begins to say, chewing slowly, savoring both the sweet bread and the words she is about to utter. I ran into Jessica's old assistant yesterday afternoon, the young girl who used to bring her coffees and put up with her yelling. She was buying vegetables at the farmer's market. She recognized me right away and told me the end of the play. I settle back into my chair, crossing my hands on the glass table. I do not feel anxiety or morbid anticipation or even an ounce of revenge. I only feel the clinical curiosity of someone reading the last page of a historical record to make sure the data matches up. I am listening, Brenda. Give me the detailed report. The investor Arthur carried out his threat to the letter, Brenda recounts, leaning forward, lowering her voice as if we were sharing state secrets. The very Monday following the gala dinner, he sent a full team of external auditors to review every last receipt at the company. They did not find any massive illegal fraud, I have to admit that. Your daughter was too smart to go to jail. But they found what auditors call a pattern of systematic financial window dressing. She exaggerated projected profit margins, hid minor losses by rolling them from one quarter to the next, and presented reports that, while technically legal, were ethically indefensible. Everything was a giant facade, exactly like her personal life. I take a small sip of my tea. The chamomile taste relaxes my throat. Trust is the only capital that really matters at that level, Brenda. Once you prove that you are capable of lying about the very foundation of your own family, nobody trusts you with their millions. Exactly, Brenda nods, tapping the table with her index finger. The board of directors asked for her immediate resignation. They gave her the option to call it a voluntary retirement, for personal reasons, to avoid a bigger scandal that would tank the company's stock, but they stripped her of all her executive bonuses and privileges. They walked her out the back door of the building, Eleanor, and that was just the first blow. Brenda takes a dramatic pause, taking another sip of black coffee, letting the weight of the information settle in the quiet air of my living room. Mark filed for divorce 2 weeks after the dinner, she continues, her tone growing more sober, stripped of any mockery. The man could not handle the public humiliation. His ego was shattered, knowing his partners saw him as the naive husband of a social scammer. Plus, it turns out that before they got married, when Jessica believed she would always be the financial rock star of the relationship, she insisted on signing an extremely aggressive prenuptial agreement to protect her own income. That same arrogance cut her head off. In the divorce, Mark walked away with the vast majority of the liquid assets. The massive white house in the suburbs was put up for sale almost immediately. The image of that house, with its enormous windows, clinical white walls, and cold quartz surfaces where my clumsy hands dropped a glass, flashes through my mind. I remember the ground floor bedroom, filled with stacked boxes, where they confined me like an old piece of furniture. I remember the echo of Jessica's screams bouncing off the kitchen tiles, that entire empire of geometric perfection and emotional coldness, now reduced to a for sale sign driven into the front lawn. And the boy, Andrew? I ask, keeping my voice in a perfectly neutral tone. The teenager chose to stay with his father, Brenda answers, shrugging with a mix of resignation and bluntness. According to the assistant, the kid did not want to give up his lifestyle, his elite private school, or his tech comforts. Jessica moved out a month ago. She is renting a 2-bedroom apartment in a building complex on the east side of the city. A noisy place, full of neighbors, with no private security and no marble kitchen islands. She is completely alone, Eleanor. The castle crumbled because the foundation was made of paper, and paper, as we know better than anyone, dissolves when the rain of truth falls on it. A deep, thick, reflective silence settles between us. Brenda watches me closely, searching my face for any sign of regret, a mother's pain, or perhaps malicious triumph, but she finds none of that. The only thing dwelling in my features is absolute peace, the unshakable serenity of someone who has balanced the final ledger of an accounting book that was in the red for decades. I do not feel joy over my daughter's downfall. Celebrating the collapse of the person I gave life to would be a betrayal of my own humanity. However, I do not feel a single milligram of guilt either. Jessica built her house on the sand of ingratitude and contempt. I simply refuse to keep pretending to be the rock that held up her delusion. The file is closed, Brenda, I finally say, breaking the silence with a soft but firm voice, brushing the breadcrumbs off the table with my hand. The consequences are hers. She drafted that destiny with every scream, every slight, and every attempt to erase my sacrifice from her history. I only handed her the mirror. What she did upon seeing her reflection is no longer my jurisdiction. Brenda nods slowly with an expression of deep, almost reverential respect. We finish our breakfast talking about trivial things: the weather promising a hot summer, neighborhood news, and the new mystery novels we have swapped. At 12 noon, Brenda grabs her coat, gives me a warm, strong hug that comforts my soul, and leaves, leaving behind an apartment steeped in the smell of cinnamon and true loyalty. After washing the cups and leaving the kitchen spotless, I feel an overwhelming urge to go out. I do not want to stay cooped up. I want to walk. I want to feel the pulse of the city beneath the soles of my shoes. I want to confirm that the world keeps spinning with its chaotic, beautiful rhythm. I put on a light, fine wool coat, sling my leather purse over my shoulder, and step out into the street. The afternoon air is fresh, clean, stripped of the suffocating tension that used to dominate my days. I walk down the main avenue at a steady pace, unhurried but unstopping. No one pushes me. No one demands that I hurry my step. No one looks at their smartwatch, sighing in annoyance at my slowness. I am simply an older woman, absolute master of her time and her space, walking along the cracked sidewalks that know my history better than my own blood. Without planning it beforehand, my feet lead me toward the historic downtown. I stop in front of the imposing gray stone building of City Hall. I look up at the large first-floor windows, and then I lower my gaze to the small ventilation grates that lead to the basement. The archive, the place where I left my youth, my eyesight, and my joints. For a long time, Jessica made me believe that my work down there was a source of shame, irrefutable proof of my mediocrity and my lack of ambition. She made me feel that cataloging the city's old papers was a loser's job. But today, standing in front of that massive block of stone under the golden light of the May sun, I see the immense truth that she could never understand. I was the guardian of memory. I was the person who ensured that the births, deaths, properties, and rights of thousands of citizens were not lost in the chaos of oblivion. My work was the invisible glue that held the fabric of this city together. There is no dishonor in silent service. There is no shame in the hard work that sustains the lives of others. True mediocrity resides in those who, upon reaching the top of the mountain, mock the steps they stepped on to climb up. I take a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of bus exhaust, candied almonds from the corner stand, and hot asphalt. I smile. A tiny private smile that is born in the center of my healthy chest and reflects in my eyes. I turn around and start the journey back home. Halfway there, I step into an old stationery store and buy a pack of brand new cardboard folders in a bright yellow color, free of any moisture stains or dust from the past. I arrive at my building at 4 in the afternoon. The elevator creaks with its usual familiarity as it goes up to the 3rd floor. I insert the key into the lock, push the wooden door open, and enter my sanctuary. I drop my purse on the chair, take off my coat, and then I see it. On the small side table next to the landline, the old cassette answering machine has a red light blinking rhythmically in the dimness of the living room. A new message. I approach slowly. My heart does not race. My breathing does not change. I stop in front of the black plastic device, raise my right hand, and press the play button with a firm, steady movement. The tape lets out a mechanical whir, a dull click, and then the static sound of the connection fills the air. "Mom, it is me. It is Jessica." The voice coming out of the tiny speaker is almost unrecognizable. There is not a single trace of the authoritative, sharp, executive tone she used to give me orders. There is no impatience. There is no coldness. There is none of that hysterical urgency to optimize time. It is a small, fragile voice, broken by the overwhelming weight of a reality she can no longer control. It is the voice of someone who has run out of script and out of stage. I know you asked me not to look for you, Mom. I know that revoking my access to your medical files was your way of closing the door. The voice trembles. It breaks for a second, and I hear the unmistakable sound of a breath hitched by held-back tears. But I do not have anyone else. Mark left me. He took the house. He took the money. Andrew barely answers my text messages. At the company, they forced me to resign. They told me my integrity was compromised. Everything collapsed, Mom. Everything I built fell to pieces. I stand still, motionless, with my arms at my sides, listening to every syllable. You were right, the message continues. And this time, the crying overflows, wet, pathetic, and raw. It was all a lie. I was cruel to you. I was a monster to you when you needed me the most, when your heart almost stopped. I was so blinded by wanting to be perfect in front of everyone else that I forgot. I forgot who I really was. I am living in a tiny apartment. The silence here is driving me crazy. I do not know what to do. I do not know how to start over. Please, Mom, please answer the phone. Let me come see you. Let me ask for your forgiveness looking you in the eyes. I need you. I really need you. The message ends. The machine emits a long electronic beep, marking the end of the recording, followed by the dry click of the tape stopping. The red light stops flashing and stays solid. Silence takes over my living room once again. A dense, absolute silence, heavy with all the words that were spoken far too late. I close my eyes for a moment. I feel a pang of compassion. Yes, because I am a human being and because, despite everything, the woman crying on that tape came from my womb. I understand her pain. I understand the absolute terror of falling from a great height and discovering that there is no safety net waiting for you at the bottom, because you yourself made sure to cut all the ropes. But compassion is not synonymous with submission. Internal forgiveness does not demand external reconciliation. If I pick up that receiver, if I open the door to my home for her, the cycle will just start all over again. Jessica would use my forgiveness as a new brick to rebuild her ego. She would go back to feeding off my energy, my time, my willingness to sacrifice. I would once again become the invisible foundation upon which to build her next lie. And my heart, this brave, repaired muscle beating in my chest, no longer has the reserves to finance anyone else's reconstructions. I open my eyes. I reach my hand out toward the answering machine. I do not press the erase button. Erasing is denying history, and an archivist never destroys an authentic record. Instead, I press the eject button. The small plastic lid pops up. I take the microcassette between my thumb and index finger. It is a tiny, lightweight object, but it holds the exact weight of poetic justice. I walk to the dining room and grab one of the bright yellow folders I just bought. With my black ink pen, I write on the top tab in flawless, straight, and clear handwriting, Jessica. Conclusion. I slide the small cassette inside the folder. Then I head toward the corner of the living room, toward my old faithful metal filing cabinet painted industrial gray. I grab the handle of the fourth drawer, the one that holds the closed cases, and I pull it. The metal rails slide with their smooth, musical purr. I place the bright yellow folder right at the back, behind all the others. It is the last document, the final piece of evidence, the period at the end of a story that took me decades of silence and a heart attack to draft correctly. I push the drawer shut with the palm of my hand, listening to the firm, definitive thud of the metal closing tight. The file is secure. The past is in its place. I turn around and walk toward my reading armchair, my mustard-colored, upholstered refuge that knows the exact shape of my back. I sit down slowly, resting my arms on the armrests, feeling the comforting texture of the fabric beneath my fingertips. The afternoon sun has started to set, bathing my living room in a thick, peaceful orange light. The dust particles dance lazily in the beams of light, oblivious to drama, oblivious to the noise of the outside world. I tilt my head back, take a deep breath, and let the silence embrace me. It is a clean, hard-earned silence, a silence that is no longer a prison, but an impenetrable fortress. I sit there, motionless, listening to the constant, strong rhythm of my own heart, knowing with absolute certainty that the only file I am interested in keeping open from now on is the file of my own undeniable peace.